Good morning. It is my pleasure to say that I am speaking to you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin First Nation. Welcome to all the participants. Not everybody's here yet, but we're starting to begin. We are going to start as it is. Now, what I'd like to ask all of the participants, if you would turn off your microphones and videos in order to save bandwidth. We're going to have close to 70 people on this, so it will be a big help. Now, please use the chat to ask questions. Now, you can ask them at any time during the presentation, but they will not be actually asked until the end of the presentation, and Lalith will be coordinating that. He will be monitoring them and asking you once in order and asking the next one in order to get ready to ask the question. So please be brief, because this will have to be over by 10:30. This session is being recorded, and the very first thing is greetings from the High Commissioner Designate from Sri Lanka. I will play.
Dr. Peter Bannick, President, Royal Commonwealth Society, Canada. Mr. Tilak Paranagama, Royal Commonwealth Society, Sri Lanka. Professor Mohan Munasinghe, guest speaker, ladies and gentlemen. It is with a great pleasure that I make my maiden address today, following my arrival as Sri Lankan High Commissioner designated to Canada. Having just arrived in Canada, I welcome this opportunity to briefly address this webinar. I am pleased to share this platform with the eminent Professor Mohan Munasinghe, a Nobel laureate who is a guest speaker today. As many of you know, Professor Munasinghe shared 2007 Nobel Peace Prize and made us all proud this great achievement. He was also honored by the head of 5 countries who have presented him with the highest national awards. At a time when the entire world has been impacted by the COVID-19 global pandemic, it is timely that the Royal Commonwealth Society in Sri Lanka and Canada are hosting this webinar on the prospect for sustainable development in post-COVID Commonwealth, which is relevant and necessary in the current context. Despite the gradual return to the normalcy in many parts of the world due to vaccine and safety measures, we are still grappling with many issues that have arisen due to prolonged pandemic, leading to overall economic hardship and development delays. As we all are eager to listen to Professor Munasinghe, I would like to conclude my brief remarks by thanking Royal Commonwealth Society in Sri Lanka and Canada for opportunity, and wish Professor Munasinghe and the webinar all the success. Thank you.
I would like to ask Major General Tilak to introduce the speaker.
And the video on. Okay, Peter, General is ready to start firing.
Yes, good.
Hi everybody. I congratulate the organizers and welcome all participants. I am Major General Tilak Paranagama, President RCS Sri Lanka. It is my present task to introduce Professor Mohan Munasinghe today. Professor Mohan Munasinghe is an eminent Sri Lankan academic who is the chairman of the Munasinghe Institute of Mines, Munasinghe Institute of Development, and also the Mine Group. He is an honorary life member of RPS Sri Lanka. Professor Munasinghe earned the BA Honours and MA degrees in engineering from Cambridge University, UK. The SMN professional EE degrees in electrical engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, USA. the PhD degree in solid state physics from McGill University, Canada, and the MA degree in development economics from Concordia University, Canada. He has also received several honorary doctorates honoris causa. He was vice chair of the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC-4, who shared the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize for Peace, and more recently received the 2021 Blue Planet Prize, also called the Environmental Nobel Prize. The heads of 5 countries, including Brazil, Bangladesh, Dominican Republic, France, and Sri Lanka, have presented highest national awards to him. Professor Munasinghe is the author of over 120 scholarly books and about 400 technical papers well known in scientific journals on climate change, disaster management, environment, sustainable development, energy, transport, urban infrastructure, water resources, telecommunication, and sustainable consumption and production. Details are available on ResearchNet. From RCS Sri Lanka felicitated him in 2008, and in association with the Central Environment Authority, today we felicitate him once again in association with RCS Canada, and it is my present task to invite Professor Munasinghe to present his make his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ayubowan, Vanakkam, greetings from Sri Lanka. Thank you to the organizers, RCS Canada and RCS Sri Lanka, for inviting me to speak at this important event. It is my privilege and pleasure to talk to colleagues and friends from both organizations. I will talk about transforming the post-COVID world to become a more sustainable and climate resilient one using the balanced inclusive green growth BIGG path based on the Sustainomics framework. Digital technology will play a key role as we seek sustainable development in the 21st century, including social progress, environmental protection, and economic prosperity. I look forward to discussing and learning with you about the relevance of some of these ideas for the Commonwealth, a diverse community of nations. Let us act now together. Today, I will talk to you about post-COVID sustainable development prospects via balanced inclusive green growth, BIGG. Which critical global problems does humanity face? There are many global issues that block sustainable development. There's poverty, inequality, resource shortages, energy, water, and food, financial sector collapse, pandemics like COVID, conflicts and insecurity, weak leadership and poor decision-making, unsustainable values, and of course, climate change, which is the ultimate threat multiplier, worsening all the other issues. These multiple threats are interrelated and synergistic, but unfortunately, we, the stakeholders, have divergent interests. Our responses are uncoordinated. We have lack of leadership at the top level. But we will get more leadership, I hope, from the middle level of city mayors, community leaders, and company CEOs. But we do need robust, integrated, and comprehensive strategy. Let's look at poverty and hunger in 2020. There were 800 million hungry people, 1 in every 9, mainly in Africa and Asia. China is the exception, raising 900 million out of poverty from the 1980s. There are 9 global resource systems which are key, of which 4, we have already exceeded the sustainability limits, and 2 of those resource systems, the climate and biodiversity, are especially vital for global stability. Let's look at the nexus of resource limits, inequality, and poverty. There is a concept called the ecological footprint of humanity, which is the sum total of resources we need to sustainably support us on the planet. In 2012, we needed almost 1.5 Earths to support us. And by 2030, we will need 2 planets. Clearly, we don't have this. Who is doing all this consumption? There is the unfair world consumption champagne glass. 85% of the consumption is done by the top richest people in the world. They consume 60 or 70 times more than the bottom 20%. And there are, as I said, 800 million people who are starving. 1% of the richest own more wealth than 99% of the rest of us. And 1% emit 175 times more per capita GNP than the poorest, 10%. Just imagine, during COVID-19 in 2020, 2,200 billionaires gained 20% in their wealth. And global arms expenditures also in 2020 was almost $2 trillion. So if we put these 2 panels together, we will see why we have this. When the rich already use more than 1 planet, where are the resources to help the poor, especially after climate change? So we have 75 years of unmet goals and broken promises from 1947, when we had the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a very fine document. Today we have the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. The UHDR, Human Rights Declaration of 1947, included all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of 2015. So we haven't moved very far forward. Now we need to understand that global sustainability requires good alignment of all productive assets. What are these assets? You have a biogeophysical resources, which is Mother Nature. There are productive economic assets like capital and labor and so on. And then you have the financial aggregates, the stock market indicators, GNP growth rates, and so on. Now, normally people's heads are in the clouds. They're looking at the stock market indicators and so on. But their feet must be firmly on the ground. What is the natural resource base? If these 3 levels are closely aligned, we have sustainability. But what is happening is something very different. There is poor leadership which is focused mainly on financial data, disconnected from the assets in the real world. So first you have the asset bubble, for example, of 2008, which divorced the stock market from the productive economic base. And when that bubble collapsed, you had enormous misery. There is another bubble, a social bubble, 2 billion people who are poor, and high economic growth rates simply disguise that fact. And there is another disconnect here, and that is called environmental externalities, because we are using economic assets and abusing the environment. And this is causing climate change, it has caused pandemics and many other things. So this is driven by greed. We enjoy that now, but we pay later. And a few enjoy, but many will pay the price. What is happening in terms of how we address these issues? These are human values and choices. Government bailouts, many trillions of dollars, mainly to rich companies and banks. 160 billion to help the poor, development aid, much less. and a few $billion, pocket change for the environment. World military expenditures, 2 trillion in 2020, as I told you. So with these kinds of priorities, how can we achieve sustainability? So we want to avoid barbarization, very risky future scenario. We have unrestrained market forces, no ethical or moral values. So that is leading to poverty, inequality, pandemics, environmental degradation, resource shortages, terrorism, and of course, climate change. And that leads to chaos and breakdown and a fortress world where rich will live in enclaves and the poor will die miserably outside. How will we cope with such a world? What are the key concepts to move forward towards a 21st century Earth eco-civilization? We can address these complex multiple issues with the Sustainalytics framework and the balanced inclusive green growth path, which I presented in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit. And in the past 30 years, it has been applied widely and taught as well. And it's a good framework for the UN 2030 agenda and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The first core concept of this approach is called climb the mountain. With empowerment, action, and foresight, we want to make development more sustainable. See, sustainable development is like a peak that is covered with clouds. Although it is not visible, if we start walking uphill, one step at a time, eventually we will reach the top. And this step-by-step approach is very practical because unsustainable activities are easy to identify. When we leave this room, we switch off the light. We can turn off a tap. We can plant a tree. And this approach tells us how to do it not only at the personal level, but at the level of cities, companies, countries, and so on. At the national level, for example, you have to make sure that all the cities are sustainable. And how do you do that? You integrate sustainable urban policy into the main development sectors and systems like energy, health, agriculture, and so on, and the natural resource base and the communities of poor people. And then you get this sustainable development. But you have to integrate. It has to be an integrated approach. At the business level, you have corporate social responsibility plus sustainability accounting, triple bottom line, many approaches which companies are now trying to pursue, the better ones anyway. The second core concept is called harmonizing the sustainable development triangle for balance and integration. We need economic prosperity to raise the poor out of poverty. But we also need to protect the environment, natural resources, and avoid pollution and so on. And we need social empowerment, inclusion, and all the other things that go with it. And the interaction of these three elements is especially important. Any topic like poverty or inequality or sustainability can be analyzed in terms of all three dimensions. But the balance is extremely important. The assets also have to be balanced. You have built capital, which is the roads, the bridges, and other things. We have natural capital, the air, the water, and the land. But we have also social capital, which is very poorly understood and not appreciated. It is a key element which is built on personal networks and also the invisible glue that binds society together, the values, the ethics, the culture, and so on. Let me give you an example of social capital. In 2004, the greatest human disaster we have faced in modern times, Sri Lanka lost 35,000 people in a matter of hours, 1 in 500 people. So everybody was touched, every family. Our income was around $1,000 US. And everybody said this society, which is going through a civil war, cannot withstand such a blow. It will collapse. But it did not. I helped to organize the recovery, and government was paralyzed for 3 months. But civil society, businesses, churches, mosques, co-mills, Buddhist temples, people combed the beaches and recovered the bodies. So that's a kind of social capital that came to the fore and saved the nation. 2005, you had Hurricane Katrina in the USA, which was a relatively small event, 1,850 deaths in one city. A high-income society, $35,000 or more. But what happened? You had rape, looting, and a complete breakdown of civil society in New Orleans. And social capital was non-existent because there was no oil. So social capital is not a property of the rich or the poor, but it exists in countries, and we must use it as we go forward to sustainability. The third core concept is to transcend boundaries in our own minds through innovation and fresh ideas. We have to replace unsustainable, unethical values. We have to think in terms of multiple disciplines, in terms of global scales, not the local, and centuries instead of years or months, and multiple stakeholders. Unethical values, unfortunately, drive the current unsustainable development paradigm. Greed, selfishness, corruption, violence, and so on. That has caused a model of economic maldevelopment, unsustainable growth based on debt, extreme market forces, poverty, inequality, and so on. And that has led to the environmental debt, unsustainable pollution, resource depletion. And the fewer resources we have, the more we fight over these. There were no weapons of mass destruction. The invasions of wars, all on resources like oil, water, and so on. And that is shrinking our sustainable development space, very unfortunately. Disciplines. Sustainable development issues range from social justice and equity all the way to biogeophysical resources. And we need topics going from philosophy and ethics through politics and engineering to the natural sciences. And these have to all function. We have to have an integrated transdisciplinary approach to solve the sustainable development problem. And we need to transcend stakeholder boundaries too. Civil society and business have to work together with government. Sometimes we have to push governments to do the right thing, to strengthen leadership and for good governance to protect our sustainable development space. The fourth core concept is very simple. It's just implement, implement, implement. Because many practical analytical tools, case studies, and examples are available now. And if you contact me, I can let you know some of these. Now, what urgent changes are needed to restore present unsustainable global systems that may collapse? Take a look at this graph. Here you have climate risk, which is the environment. And here, as an example, is the economic level, which is per capita income. If you're a poor country, you have, let's say, low greenhouse gas emissions per capita, but also low GNP. If you're a rich country, you are emitting above the safe limit, but you are also rich, and many middle countries are in between here. But here, this is a non-harmonious situation, and that's why you have the X in the middle of this sustainable development triangle. There is no balance here. So the first step is called green growth. We balance the economy and the environment. And for rich countries, they can have the same quality of life, but with less material use and we have the technologies to do it. And Canada is one of the countries that can well follow that example. For the middle countries, we have a different path. It's called the Green Growth Tunnel, and Sri Lanka is one of those countries. We will not follow the profligate path of the rich, but we will leapfrog. We will use the knowledge that we have to arrive at the same point. The third step is called balanced inclusive green growth. And here we harmonize all three elements. We bring in the social element by following green growth paths, which are pro-poor and inclusive. That is, to implement the sustainable development goals, we need to follow this kind of BIGG path. And it works not only for climate, also for food, water, energy, and so on. This is the framework for the 21st century Earth eco-civilization with ethical values, focusing on things like happiness and well-being, not just material consumption or GNP. And we have a global vision socially to meet everybody's basic needs, environmentally to respect nature, economically to be prosperous, because we don't want to be poor. In 2019, I chaired a presidential expert committee, and we presented our president a report called Sustainable Sri Lanka 2030 Vision and Strategic Path. And in that we said, by 2030, we hope to become an Indian Ocean hub with a thriving economy with a high quality of life that is resource efficient, advanced, stable, dynamic, and resilient to shocks, respecting key environmental and social sustainability constraints. We need a green environment that builds on Sri Lanka's traditional respect for nature, keeps our resource use and ecological footprint within the sustainable biocapacity of the country. And we have an inclusive society that meets the basic needs of all people, especially the poor, while ensuring peace, reconciliation, harmony, social justice, and security. We will follow the middle path based on balanced, inclusive green growth. Now, I want to talk to you about the nexus of sustainable cities, digital technology, and climate. Digital technology can build sustainable cities that are resilient to climate change. That's the message. Why is this important? Because urban population percentage is growing, especially in Africa and Asia. You see here, it's already passing in 2015, it's already passing the 50% mark and rising. Three key characteristics of sustainable cities are compactness, connectivity within the city, and coordination of government. So you have leads benefits of higher productivity, improved efficiency, penetration of digital technology, better transport, and a wide range of benefits, including lower greenhouse gas emissions. What are the impacts of digital technology really on urban sustainability? We have a S&T policy focused on inclusive green growth technology that will increase economic productivity, reduce natural resource use, lowers pollution, facilitates public participation, and boosts sustainable consumption and production. There are economic gains, productivity gains, but there are also risks. You can have more inequality, instability, and so on. There are environmental gains. Production is more efficient, less pollution. But the risk that growth and consumerism will lead to more pollution. And digital technology, hardware, and e-waste is very bad for the environment. Socially, we have gains, more employment and income, greater access to information, but also risks like exclusion of poor and increasing inequality and marginalization. So we have to be very careful of those aspects. BIGG can enable smart, sustainable systems. These are operative in smart, sustainable cities to support infrastructure and services like energy, transport, water, waste management, public services, healthcare, and so on. There are 3 stages in smart, sustainable systems. First, you start with growth. These are focused digital technologies, mainly on delivery of services that reduce economic costs and unlock future markets. Then you go to green growth. So you have smart green systems that will also reduce environmental damage and natural resource use while boosting the economy. And then you have inclusive green growth. These are the smart sustainable systems that will use new technologies like biotech, low carbon tech, robotics, artificial intelligence to harmonize all 3 aspects: economy, environment, and society. And it goes through 3 steps: gathering big data, analyzing the data, and applying the results. And you can apply it, for example, to energy, to transport, and so on. On the BIGG path, digital technology will also link sustainable consumers and producers to create sustainable markets and culture. You start with a few sustainable consumers and a few sustainable producers, and they will form a very self-supporting loop. And eventually, if this spreads throughout the economy, which is what MIND is doing and RCS should be doing, you can have traditional markets for the old, like organic markets and so on. And you have online markets for the youth, sustainable markets. So eventually you create sustainable society with sustainable behaviors. Sustainable consumption, particularly important for food, because 1/3 of the world's food production is lost while 800 million people are starving, especially in US and Europe. This family, for example, European family, can reduce their packaging and waste while consuming and enjoying the same quality of life. That is this part of the curve. But this poor family in the Sahara, they have to be raised out of poverty along this tunnel path. We have to improve their poverty and inequality status. So those are the 2 aspects. BIGG can also unlock innovation through changing values and appealing to the heart, particularly the youth. In 2012, at the Rio +20 Earth Summit, I formed an organization called Sustainable. Join us on Facebook and so on. It is an international consortium of musicians and music lovers who believe that music and song are a universal message to communicate the message of sustainability to them, especially to the poor. Millions of poor people who attend rock concerts and other things don't have time to listen to lectures, learned lectures like this. So let's reach people through as many mechanisms as we can. Also, you have sustainable production. Here are some ideas on business sustainability from CEOs and senior managers of top multinationals, where I have given training workshops. There are 3 things that have emerged. Sustainability and triple bottom line is the wave of the future. But resource efficiency is the starting point. It's win-win. Why? Because you reduce natural resource use and your costs, and your profits will also increase. So it's win-win. And ethical values are for long-term sustainability, very important. And these are some of the companies I've worked with: BASF, the top firm in chemicals, top supermarket chain, Tesco, Unilever, Coca-Cola, all these retail companies, OPEC for oil and gas, and Petrobras in Brazil, in Malaysia, plantations, Novozymes, biotech, Vale, the biggest mining company in the world virtually, Siemens, even wine producers. They all have seen the light, we hope. Now, let me just illustrate sustainable production for you very briefly. This is looking at carbon dioxide emission hotspots along what we call the supply chain. If we look at this chain of raw material production, manufacturing, transport, retail, consumer use, recycling and disposal, if you take tea in Sri Lanka and the emissions of greenhouse gases, 47% of emissions occurred in the retail side. Why? Because the packaging uses a lot of greenhouse gases. So in this case, when we talk to the industry and we make the packaging more simple, this is the hotspot that they can use to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and improve their sustainability. You look at orange juice. In Brazil, that is sent to the UK. The main emissions occur in transport because it happens in ships. So if they find more efficient transport, they can greatly reduce the greenhouse gas footprint of that orange juice. And the milk, for example, that is produced in the UK, 76% of emissions happen in the farmhouse. So if you teach farmers to raise their cows in a more efficient way, you can actually reduce their greenhouse gas emissions substantially. For garments also, it is mainly in the raw material production because the procurement practices can be adjusted to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in the supplies that are embedded. So this can be applied to energy, water, land, any approach, so that sustainable production can focus on the hotspots to reduce their environmental burden. Now, climate change risks and cities. This is temperature rise and extreme weather, right? This is China, Zhengzhou in 2021. Heavy rains. In 3 days, 1 year's worth of rain fell. These are cars floating like dead fish in this city. This is Lytton, Canada, which you know also in 2021, July, burnt to the ground before and after. Fortunately, the people were evacuated, but they didn't have a chance because of the hottest temperatures ever recorded. So, what did the IPCC tell us, which I worked for over 20 years? Global warming is proven. It's our emissions that are causing it. In the future, it will cause great and irreversible harm, and the poor will suffer most, which is very unfair because they had the least to do with causing the problem. The solution is to integrate climate change policies into sustainable development strategy. So if you develop sustainably, that's the best way to limit climate change. And at the national level, one way is to integrate these climate change impacts into the development model, into the sectors, the systems, and so on. Keeping in mind that climate is only one of 17 sustainable development goals. So it makes sense that you have to integrate it into the sustainable development strategy. Now, this is the way that climate change responses work. For example, we find that it is human activities which give rise to greenhouse gas emissions that is increasing greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that is through a process called radiative forcing. It's disturbing the climate. And the empire strikes back. Climate will impose stressors on human and natural systems, as we showed, temperature, sea level rise, precipitation, and so on. And that will drive our development paths in the future. So there is a complete cycle, but this is a bad cycle. We have to break it. So there is one process called mitigation, which is to reduce, to squeeze down the amount of emissions. And there is a process called adaptation, which is to squeeze down the impact on human and natural systems. And we do these two by making development more sustainable. And in particular, sustainable cities will be more climate resilient too. It's a byproduct. To reduce harm to economy and human beings and biodiversity. Cities will be cooler, less air pollution, less risk from water and vector-borne diseases, better energy management, and so on. So to achieve sustainability and the Earth eco-civilization of the 21st century, let us focus on happiness and well-being. There is a concept called gross national happiness, which I've worked with the Kingdom of Bhutan. And we are trying to replace gross national product, which is only material consumption. And we do know that although material consumption is important, it is not the only thing to increase happiness. Digital technology, which is focusing more on services, will actually hopefully reduce material consumption. And this is where we come to the 17 sustainable development goals. Digital technologies in goal 9, and these goals are adapted to each country's needs, although they are universal. It's very humane, we leave no one behind, but we follow the UN 2030 agenda. Finally, let me talk a little bit about happiness and some personal choices. We need to harmonize ourselves before we try to harmonize the earth. We have our work, income, and job satisfaction in the domain of the mind. But we also need health, fitness. We need to look after our environment to become well balanced, the mind and body. And finally, we need family, friends, and community, the social side, and that is a balanced personal sustainability triangle. And in a post-COVID world, we must rebuild unbalanced and shattered lives. But watch out for potential surprises. There's climate change, the ultimate risk multiplier, pandemics, environmental crises, resource shortages, social unrest, conflicts, economic crises, technological disruption. But innovative thinking will build resilience against these shocks and help us survive in a dynamically changing world. Out of 12 potential economic disruptive technologies that I talked about, 8 are digital. So although digital technology will be a great boon, we have to watch out for the risks also. Optimistic final message for Sri Lanka and Canada. There are multiple global problems that pose serious challenges. But these problems can be solved provided we begin now. Sustainomics showed us the way to balanced, inclusive green growth. Governance systems must be transformed at all levels to deal with multiple crises in an integrated way, not piecemeal. And we need to manage post-COVID urban growth to support sustainable development. I believe the Royal Commonwealth Society can lead in devising 21st century paths for sustainable development in Sri Lanka, Canada, and the whole world. I'll end with an ancient Pali blessing from Sri Lanka. It says, may the rains come in time, which is the environment. May the harvest be bountiful, which is the economy. May the people be happy and contented. May the king be righteous, which is society. So even in ancient times, our ancestors knew about the Sustainable Development Triangle. We are just struggling to rediscover it today. My institute, the Munasinghe Institute for Development, is trying to make development more sustainable. We give awards and scholarships. We have applied research programs. We engage in private and public policy. We have many publications which will be enlightening. Visit our website. Stuti, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohan. That's a
I'm handing over to you, Peter.
yes, thank you. I just wanted to thank, before we turn it over to the questions, I'm not sure we have any questions, Lalith, yet.
Yes, I'd invite anyone to ask a question. If you put your hand up, there's also sign that you can put up.
Put it in the chat. Put it.
Yeah,
in
you
the
can
chat.
also put it in the chat. Yeah, that'll be the best, I guess. Yes.
Well,
We have
while we're
about
waiting
15
for-
minutes.
While we're waiting for other questions, I may as host ask you, Mohan, what about circular economy? What role do you see the idea of a circular economy playing in reducing our resource needs, etc.?
Peter, you'll have to unblock my video because you blocked my video. I can't switch my video on.
Art, can you unblock his video?
I think it's to do with the screen sharing. Okay.
Right, you are off, Mohan.
Oh, okay, fine.
Right now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Few technical glitches, but we've got it all mastered. A circular economy is obviously part of balanced, inclusive green growth. It's extremely important, and it's enshrined in a lot of catchy slogans like, for example, recycle, reuse, and so on. And actually, all this technological fix, even digital technology and all this, has got its own set of problems. As I said, there's e-waste. So how, if we can somehow recycle, say, the rare earths in the e-waste, that's an enormous saving, not only in cost, but also potentially toxic elements. So I believe the circular economy is very important, particularly in the urban culture where we do not have the instinct to do that. Everything's throwaway. And it has to do with our values. Ultimately, people have to have the right values, and you have to have the right pressure building up in society, so that if you see somebody doing something obviously unsustainable, you sort of say, hey, look, that's not done. I mean, in a rural context and in agriculture, there is a little more of the recycling. I mean, you have organic fertilizer and this kind, it's more natural. But the urban societies are extremely unnatural in that respect. And I fully support Peter's point that you must press the recycling aspect.
Can I take over, Peter, now? Because I will then take the questions. So there are a couple of questions here. Actually, this I was also going to highlight what you mentioned about harmonizing self, mind, and body. And there's a question from David Spence, or a comment, very nice analytical presentation. However, it omits any religious, spiritual foundation principles that will lead humanity to change. Where is the talk about religious values? And I will add to that in terms of, you know, we have been ignoring the word spirituality for humanity in the last 2000 years in the techno-industrial world, but we are all spiritual beings. And I'm so happy that you brought out the triangle of personal sustainability, growth. So what are your thoughts on that, Professor Munasinghe?
I believe that is, I mean, the question of spirituality is an internal one. I personally don't believe too much in organized religion so much, but I mean, that's, some people like community spiritual activity. I think it's a very personal one. But I use the word ethical and moral values very much to represent the spiritual aspects, without getting into the controversies that the word religion tends to bring up. So remember, I'm a public lecturer. I give talks to a wide range of people, and you try to use the words that are the least confrontational and the most people then accept it. So ethics and morality to me capture the main elements of spirituality. But I do believe it has a very important role if you want to change values.
Thank you, Professor. And next question is from Art Hunter. There was no mention of population growth in achievement of sustainability. Could you explain why?
I think if you look at the champagne glass, you will see why. Because a baby born in a very poor country is going to consume only 1/100 of somebody born in a very affluent society, say New York. So if we talk about population management, there is also an issue of social justice there. Where does the population control have to happen? Because the poor are not going to be raised out of poverty overnight. So the management of scarce resources has to focus on sustainable consumption. The number of people, of course, eventually, when everybody wealth is more equally distributed and even the poor are a little more affluent, then their numbers do matter. But at the moment, what is happening is gross, let me use the word, gross overconsumption by a small group at the top. Okay, so it's much more important to focus on that. And the whole topic about population tends to disguise that. I mean, you know, say, oh, all these poor people breeding all over the place. But they are not causing the huge resource problem we face. Sorry to be so blunt, but that's a straight answer to a very important question. So eventually, yes, in some of my other talks, I show how the global population should level off around 9 billion around 2050. That is one of the ways. And the poor, if you look at my graph, the poor have to be brought out of poverty along the green growth tunnel. They are not following the profligate path. So all 7-8 billion people on the planet cannot aspire to live the life of people in North America. Then there are not enough resources. So the poor, certainly we bring them out of poverty. We, of course, try to limit the population growth rate. But the main problem is the excessive consumption of the top end. And I would include myself probably in the top 20 percentile of the global population. But we must be aware, self-aware enough to say, look, what have I done to solve this problem instead of pointing the finger at somebody else? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So David Spence has made a further comment by saying religious is not only individual, but very communal. So I presume he's taking it into a space that community is formed through that too. So there's a channel there that we cannot ignore in this process. And I think I also personally believe that that conversation needs to happen if we are to get through to individuals in changing individual behavior, because religions are still playing a major role all around the world. So it's a vehicle we cannot ignore. And then I use the word spirituality in a more sort of a secular way, because we are in awe of the miracle of life and all that too. And I'm so happy to also see mindfulness being as a way of going inward rather than looking for solutions outside ourselves. Mindfulness is becoming a practice for us to go inward to really find some of those solutions within us too, and to find that grounding rather than seek solutions and blame everybody else around us. So there's a real growth in that area that we cannot ignore in terms of values and all that too. So I'm again, I probably take it up with you separately too, Professor, in the harmonizing of self and mind and body. There's another quick question, and we'll make that the last, I presume. Can the growth economy sustain the balance of a healthy global life? From David Spence again.
That's why I talked about inclusive green growth, because in a sense, the word growth is a bit, many hardcore environmentalists do not like the word growth. But on the other hand, if you look at 2 billion poor people on the planet, they need headroom so that their consumption can be increased. So and that is precisely why we have to go into details. We cannot sort of say, well, growth is bad, because what we mean is that the kind of unequal growth, and let me be blunt here again, that oligopolistic capitalism has created, the Western model, is unsustainable. But it does not mean that poorer countries cannot grow along that tunnel path. We don't have to follow, as I said, the profligate curve of the rich countries. So growth, if it is properly structured, is not a bad thing. It is part of development, especially if you want to raise the poor out of poverty. But we have to be extremely careful to be mindful of inequality, that growth, and this is the three-tier diagram I showed you, high GNP growth rate doesn't mean a thing if the Gini coefficient, if the inequality is getting worse and worse. And the other statistic that during the height of COVID, the billionaires increased their wealth by 20%, while hundreds of millions of people are without jobs and stuff. So that is the kind of growth that I agree is undesirable, but there are other forms, and that is the whole point. I mean, I can't give you in the 30-minute lecture all the nuances. Read my book and you will see the specific tools, macroeconomic models and others, which allow us to grow green and inclusively. And that is, I think, a very valid question. We can reach balanced, inclusive green growth. We have the models to do it. It's just that the decision makers don't seem to have the willpower to do it. And this is why I need RCS and government and civil society to push the governments to start doing the right thing instead of focusing on playing politics and enriching a few. So that is also a very important part of getting things done, of implementing things. Thank you.
So Peter and Prof, if everybody is okay to stay for a few minutes more, I think there's an important question that Art Hunter has put out in relation to the COP26. So he asks, and there are a few other questions down there too. So I'm happy to stay for another 10 minutes if everybody else is okay, since we did have some technology issues. So Art, Peter, is that okay with you to pose that question?
Yes,
to
absolutely.
Yeah,
Please.
I see.
Thank
I
you.
see.
Wonderful.
Mr. Jaivir is saying fine. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you believe that COP26 will achieve sustainability after 75 years of broken promises? And I'm also going to premise that with, I just heard an interview with the environmental minister, and the CBC interviewer kept on saying, pushing him and saying, so, but you guys have always broken these promises. What makes you think that you're going to keep this promise again? And he kept on repeating the same thing over and over again. So I'm not confident, but what are your thoughts, Professor?
Very much yours. I'm skeptical, and that is why I keep saying civil society and business. I include business because they are not part of the problem, they are part of the solution. One has to push the politicians. There's very weak leadership at the top. These summits are photo ops. Every leader takes home a few photographs that they show that purport to show that they saved the summit and not everybody else. But at the end of the day, the implementation is very weak. We have the Paris agreements, which were carved out with great difficulty. At least try to, but at the moment we are heading for at least 3 degrees. If you look at the pledges that have been made by various countries, these are voluntary pledges, remember, and this is climate, which is only 1 out of 17 sustainable development goals. There are 16 others. Even this one, we are not heading for 1.5 or 2 degrees, we are heading for 3 degrees still. And these are with voluntary commitment. So there is no enforcement at all. I mean, I don't want to sound too negative, but I don't want to be naive either. I think other pressures have to be brought in order to make to change the dynamic, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So Priyan Dias has a question. Should we try to move away from having primate cities, i.e. not to have a single very large city in a country, but rather 2, 3 larger ones, small, I presume he's meaning medium-sized ones. And also I would like to just highlight the fact that Sri Lanka is still about 60%, 65% rural versus urban. I think it's one of the rarer countries in the developing world, I presume. So what are your thoughts on the urban-rural mix too in the sustainability area, in addition to that question, Professor?
Yes, I mean, one has to be a little philosophical and in a sense, spiritual in the sense man proposes and God disposes. But in an entirely different spin on that, if you don't believe in God, look at what COVID has done to us. Mother Nature is saying, when you have large packed biomass, human biomass in a city, in a packed space and very often in slums, you are an open target for a zoonosis or any pathogen that will jump from animals to human beings. And on the other hand, we are abusing habitats. We are not practicing proper practices in animal husbandry with the kinds of ways that we are raising chickens and cattle and so on. So Mother Nature is also saying, you know, there's a limit to how much you can pack people densely together. And who knows? That's why I said, watch out for potential surprises. To be resilient, cities will have to develop certain characteristics. And maybe Priyan has a point. Maybe the answer is not huge megapolis, but a more scattered kind of development. And that may happen by itself, that people will find that if you live in a city, your life expectancy will go down because your chances of getting a pathogen are more. So you tend to move out. Let us see. I mean, it sounds very sensible, but we need to analyze these patterns a lot more. And I don't have the data nor the knowledge to do it. I hope the next generation will. I mean, what keeps me going at the age of 76 is simply a little bit of guilt that our generation has not done well by the youth. And we need to pass the torch, at least to do our best to give them the best tools to survive for the future. But it's their world. I mean, they have to solve the problems. They have the new technologies. I mean, they are masters of, say, the Zoom and all these digital technologies, which while we fiddle with the buttons, you know, my granddaughter or grandson will, even with a mobile phone. So the point I'm trying to make is there is hope, right? We do what we can. We pass the torch along, but I think the world is there to be saved by the next generation, and I hope they will do it.
Thank you, Professor. So I think that leads to the last question I would suggest that this would be. And before that, there's Mahera Selvaraja has asked whether we can share all the slides if that's possible. So that's a request. And the last question from David Spence is: the Western views of science and analysis needs to be balanced with the indigenous knowledge of the grammar of animacy. Any thoughts on that? Now you alluded to that, Professor, just a little while ago too. So perhaps we can end with that question and we can move to Dr. Mainke from here.
Yes, I believe that we are the striving for modernity doesn't mean erasing our past. And that's why I gave you that quote from the past to end with, to drive that point home. And just, I gave you the example of the tsunami. In the Pacific Islands, there is a culture that if you see the sea receding from the shore, you run away and you climb a coconut tree because they know this is something bad going to happen. Whereas if you, in Sri Lanka, for example, when the sea receded, people started wading into the water saying, we can actually catch some fish. And when the actual tsunami came, they were all drowned. So there's a lot of indigenous knowledge. Not everybody has all the knowledge, but we mustn't lose that. And that is extremely important.
Thank you, Professor. You are a very youthful 76. I know you're going to be there for a long time to part with your knowledge and experience. So thank you very much for the honor for Peter for letting me moderate this. So I'll hand you back to Peter.
Thank you very much, Lalit, and thank you, Mohan. I just have to comment, I wrote a paper way back in 1978 called What is the Right Size? I've been trying to apply that to cities lately, and it's a very, very key question in all of this, I believe. I'm going to try once more to show you the greetings from the High Commissioner, but I cannot seem to do that. So we will put that on, integrated into the recording and make sure that it's shown there. Thank you very much. Whoops, what have I done here? Come on. I'd like to call, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'd very much like to call on Tisa now to thank our speaker.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. I would like to start my vote of thanks with taking a clue from Professor Mohan's presentation, which says that 21st century path, RCS to do a 21st century path. So maybe I and Gamunu can work on this and take it from there. Gamunu, I would like your comment on that.
Absolutely. Let's do it. The younger generation is the future, and this let's proceed on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gamunu. Then getting on to the formal vote of thanks, I have to thank Peter for taking the initiative to have this originated from Canada, joined with us, with RCS Sri Lanka, and taking the system forward. It took us about 2 months to get organized, but finally we did it. So thank you very much, Peter. Then we have to thank Mohan, Professor Mohan, whose first degree is arts. And then from there onwards, he became an engineer. But this is the first time, Mohan, that I saw your fingers, your long fingers, so you could have been a surgeon. Anyway, thank you very much for Mohan for that excellent presentation, and what really hit me is the 21st century path. Then, of course, my president, current president, Tilak Parnagama, general, who is the current chair of RCS, and he'll be stepping down this year, and we'll be bringing in somebody newer, younger to our group. And then Lalit Gunaratna for being the moderator. I knew from your accent, you had to be from Sri Lanka, right? So thank you very much, Lalit, for being the moderator. And then, of course, my long-term friend, Gamunu, for being the coordinator and the tail twister in twisting the tail of everybody and getting things done, and he goes into the shadow. So thank you very much, Gamunu, for all your guidance and then getting this thing started and monitoring every day what is happening. And then thank you very much, Gamunu, for all it. And then I will thank all the participants from various countries taking part in this webinar. And then thanks for organizing. And then I wish you, some people good night, some people good morning, and all have a great day. And be careful, be safe, and enjoy yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Tisa.
Thank you.
I would like to add my thanks to Art Hunter for stepping into the breach here to help with this. And as you said, Gamunu did start this all off, but also his son, Dilshan, who did a lot of work on the invitations and so on and getting the Eventbrite operation going. There were so many people who contributed, I can't name them all, but thank you for doing that. And I think that is about it. And again, thank you, Mohan, for a wonderful presentation. And I'm sure a lot of people will be watching it and will like to keep in touch to see how we can advance this. I appreciated your notion that the RCS can do something with this. I hope so. Thank you all. And we can close this off now. Thank you, Art.